If I told you that the entirety of human history, including our most devastating, catastrophic world wars, was actually just like a violent gardening project
Yeah.
designed specifically to prepare for next month, July 2026, I mean, you would probably think I'd lost my mind,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. I'd assume you were pitching me like a script for a science fiction movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the premise of the highly unique framework we are unpacking today. And since you're sitting there listening to this on May 1st, 2026, it means we are positioned right on the edge of what this source claims is the single most critical inflection point in modern human history.
Yeah, and the timeline presented in this material is incredibly specific. I mean, it argues that the political and social friction we're experiencing right now globally, it isn't just random chaos. It's actually a forced structural correction that has literally been building for millions of years.
Which is just a massively bold claim. So our mission for today's deep dive is to explore this fascinating, heavily philosophical lecture that was delivered just a couple of weeks ago on April 19th, 2026.
Right.
We're going to trace this source's step-by-step theory of human evolution, understand how it phases history, and figure out why it claims humanity has just fundamentally fumbled the handling of global knowledge.
And then, of course, we'll look at the mechanics of why the summer of 2026 is supposedly the climax of this massive global reorganization.
Yeah, that's the big one. But before we get into the actual mechanics of that evolution, we really need to establish some ground rules for how we are approaching this deep dive today.
Yeah, that's really important. So the lecture we're analyzing, it presents a very specific, spiritually and culturally charged interpretation of global history. It relies on a framework that includes some highly controversial perspectives on geopolitics, on human suffering, and especially the world wars. So our role here is not to endorse these views. And it's not to take a side or, offer a moral defense of the claims either. Our job is strictly analytical. We are just breaking down the internal logic of this source material so that you can examine these really bold ideas, understand the step-by-step perspective they're presenting, and just think critically about the concepts for yourself.
I think that's a crucial lens to hold on to as we get into this, because to understand why the source believes 2026 is this breaking point, we have to rewind to its absolute baseline definition of what planet Earth actually is.
Yeah, it completely flips how we usually think about our relationship with nature.
It really does. So the framework operates on this heavily anthropocentric premise. It basically argues that Earth is a bespoke, closed system environment.
Like a terrarium.
Yes, exactly like a terrarium, purposefully designed with one singular goal, which is to serve as a stage for human beings to operate. I mean, it says everything else you see, the plants, the animal kingdom, the oceans, right down to the microscopic bacteria.
It's all just set dressing.
Right, functionally set dressing. They exist purely to maintain environmental equilibrium so that humanity has a stable platform to execute its purpose.
So the planet is the hardware and humanity is the operating system. And according to this lecture, the timeline of this human operating system doesn't just, flow randomly. It is rigidly divided into three very distinct phases.
And for anyone trying to visualize this progression, the source breaks it down into evolution, growth, and operation. Or, in Korean, these stages are referred to as Jinhwa, Sangjang, and Unyang.
Yeah, and those three stages represent a progression from 0 to 100% of human potential. So the very first phase, evolution or Jinhwa, that covers the journey from 0 to exactly 30%.
Just 30%.
Right. And what really defines this initial phase is its agonizing, almost incomprehensible slowness. The source posits that it took hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years, just to reach that 30% mark.
I want to pause on that 30% real quick, because it's not the biological Darwinian evolution we all learned about in school. The source describes humans in this phase as, biologically human, but functionally, they were living with beast-like traits.
Oh, yeah, completely. They were surviving on sheer animalistic instinct, battling the elements, just trying to endure.
Right. But the framework suggests all of that brutal survival had a very specific output. It was generating what the source calls the seeds.
Yes, the seeds. That is the entire structural purpose of that first 30% phase. The millions of years of bare survival, the slow development of early tribal structures, the rudimentary discovery of tools and fire, none of that was about humans thriving.
It was about grinding out the raw material.
Exactly, grinding out the raw materials for the future. The source views those early discoveries, the sacrifices of ancient civilizations, the slow accumulation of culture. It views all of that as the literal seeds of knowledge.
It's kind of like Earth was this giant, messy laboratory.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Like for millions of years, the experiment was just trying to synthesize the raw chemical compounds, which are the seeds, through trial and error over millennia.
Yeah, and that makes the sheer length of the evolution phase make a sort of grim logical sense within their framework. It'd take a massive amount of time and raw human endurance to generate enough cultural and intellectual data to form a seed.
But history didn't just smoothly transition from ancient tribes into modern interconnected societies. I
Yeah.
mean, the shift from that slow 30% evolution phase into the rapid growth phase, it requires a catalyst.
And the mechanism the source provides for that transition is arguably the most jarring concept in the entire lecture. Moving from evolution to growth, it wasn't a peaceful slide. The framework argues it required a violent systemic restructuring of the entire globe.
And it points directly to World War I and World War II.
Yes, it points to the world wars as the mechanism that forced that transition.
I gotta say, I am struggling to reconcile that perspective, to be completely honest.
It's tough. It's really tough to hear.
It is, because framing the devastating, catastrophic loss of millions of human lives in the world wars as this calculated cosmic organizing period, it's just an incredibly deterministic way to view historical tragedy.
It really assigns a cold, structural utility to immense human suffering.
Exactly. It basically treats human lives as cellular material in a larger biological organism.
But that deterministic nature is exactly what makes it such a stark departure from conventional historical analysis. The source strips away the ideological and geopolitical causes of the world wars entirely.
Right. It doesn't look at the politics at all.
No, instead, it relies on a specific biological metaphor. It views humanity as a single ancient tree. The Korean term used is gamaknamu, and in this context, the world wars were a cosmic pruning process.
A pruning process.
Yeah, like a deliberate, necessary cutting back of the branches, or janjiajibout, to organize the physical shape of the organism and prepare it for a massive, rapid spurt of growth.
Okay, but the idea of pruning a tree implies that the cuts were made to encourage growth in a very specific direction.
They were. The source claims this pruning period violently ended the evolution phase by drawing the modern geopolitical borders, establishing international identities, and creating global organizations like the UN and NATO.
So it essentially arranged the global chessboard.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just drawing borders. The source attaches highly specific structural mathematics to this pruning process.
The numbers, yeah, the mathematics are central to how the framework justifies this transition.
Hmm.
According to the internal logic of the lecture, this global pruning deliberately reduced the worldwide population to approximately 3 billion people.
Well, simultaneously, the population on the Korean peninsula was reduced to roughly 30 million people.
So 3 billion globally, matched against 30 million on the peninsula. That establishes a very deliberate demographic ratio.
It creates a 100-to-1 ratio. The source invokes the traditional concept of ildangbak, which translates roughly to one person matching the capacity or weight of 100. Yeah, and this ratio wasn't a historical accident, according to the framework. It was a required cosmic equation meant to concentrate the energy of the next era into a specific geographic location.
And that geographic concentration ties directly back to the anatomy of the Gomaknamus, that ancient tree metaphor. The source maps humanity geographically to explain how this organism functions.
Right, so the Western world represents the branches.
Yeah, the parts that reach out, expand, harvest sunlight. China and the massive central continents represent the trunk, providing the sheer mass and stability. And the Korean peninsula, which the source refers to historically as Haedong.
It represents the roots.
Exactly.
The roots. And the anatomy of the tree explains the function of the pruning. You prune a tree so that the nutrients flow efficiently down into the roots, which then empowers the entire organism to grow.
Right.
So the purpose of this incredibly specific setup, the borders, the 3 billion to 30 million ratio, the root placement, it was all to create a high-pressure environment designed to breed a new generation of leaders.
And the source refers to these leaders using the traditional philosophical concept of Hongik Ingen. I really want to unpack Hongik Ingen for a moment, because it is the linchpin of what was supposed to happen next.
Yeah, it's a vital concept here.
It generally translates to individuals meant to broadly benefit all of humanity. The framework is suggesting that the devastating pruning of the world wars was a calculated setup to forge global leaders in the root nation.
Leaders whose sole purpose would be to guide and benefit the rest of the tree.
Right. That's the functional goal of the entire system. So, with the tree violently pruned, the modern borders drawn, and that 100-to-1 ratio locked in place, The universe closes the chapter on the 30% evolution phase,
And the board is completely set for phase two, Sanjiang, or the rapid growth phase.
which covers the jump from 30% all the way up to 70%.
Okay.
And the pacing of history completely flips here.
Oh, absolutely. While evolution took millions of years, growth happens in the blink of an eye. Because if the roots are finally set, the tree is primed to absorb.
And the source argues that all those seeds of global culture and knowledge, the data generated through the brutal sacrifices of that first phase, they were intentionally funneled into the roots.
Poured into the Korean peninsula right when it was in its most impoverished, devastated state following the war.
Yeah, it was essentially a vacuum waiting to pull in the world's nutrients.
And that funneling of knowledge is exactly where we reach the crux of the lecture's critique of modern society, because the framework outlines a very strict three-step mandate for how humanity was supposed to handle all of this incoming knowledge during the growth phase.
Right, the universe provided the data, but humanity had to process it correctly to successfully reach the final operation phase. And I want to make sure we lay these 3 steps out incredibly clearly for anyone listening, because understanding this sequence is the key to understanding the 2026 inflection point.
Okay, so the sequence is absorb, research, and organize.
Step 1, absorb and equip.
Yes. That's the intake mechanism. It means pulling in the vast amounts of global knowledge, the science, the culture, the raw data that the branches of the tree produced.
Then step 2 is research.
Yeah.
Which requires active, critical engagement.
Right, because once you absorb the knowledge, you can't just hold it. You must study it, interrogate its context, and really figure out how it specifically applies to improving the human condition.
Which naturally leads right into step 3, analyze and organize. This is the synthesis phase, taking all that researched, contextualized knowledge and building a cohesive ethical system out of it.
It's about establishing an organized order for how society should actually function based on what we've learned.
Absorb, research, organize. I mean, it sounds like a perfectly logical roadmap for a developing civilization.
It is logical, but the lecture asserts that humanity engaged in a catastrophic systemic failure regarding this roadmap. The core critique here is that humanity simply stopped at step 1.
We just stopped.
We absorbed the knowledge like a sponge. We took in the technology, the economic models, the data, and we became a highly intelligent species. But we completely bypassed the crucial labor of researching that knowledge's deeper purpose.
And we entirely skipped the effort required to organize it into an ethical framework.
Exactly.
You know, we discussed an analogy earlier that I think perfectly captures the danger of stopping at step 1. Think about how this applies to our relationship with information today. We essentially built a massive global library.
Right.
We collected every blueprint, every scientific paper, every philosophical text, and we stacked them to the ceiling. But instead of reading those books to figure out how to govern society, we just started using the heavy hardcover books as weapons.
To hit each other over the head.
Exactly. Hitting each other over the head just so we could secure the most comfortable reading chairs for ourselves. We built a smart society, but an entirely unorganized one.
And that analogy perfectly highlights the specific societal consequence the source is warning about. When you equip a population with massive amounts of knowledge and intelligence, but fail to organize an ethical order for how to use it, the inevitable result is a hyper-competitive, destructive landscape.
Because intelligence without organization isn't wisdom.
No, it becomes a tool for domination. If you are incredibly smart, but you lack an organized ethical framework, the default biological drive just takes over. You use that intelligence purely to win.
To secure your own survival, to climb over your neighbor, to assert superiority.
Right. The growth phase was supposed to be the time when we organized knowledge to become Hangjik Ingen, those leaders working for the benefit of all humanity. Instead, we weaponized our intellect to serve our own selfish interests.
And the failure to execute steps 2 and 3 means the tree grew, but it grew crookedly. It became bloated with unprocessed data and chaotic selfish energy. Which brings us to the timeline of the breaking point.
Because the universe operates on a schedule in this framework, the growth phase couldn't last forever. The source states that the growth phase officially reached its 70% maturity milestone on December 21st, 2012.
December 21st, 2012. I mean, that date carries so much cultural baggage. People thought the Mayan calendar was ending. There was widespread panic about the apocalypse. Movies were being made about the end of the world.
Oh yeah, 2012 was a massive cultural moment. But that anxiety around the date actually mirrors the framework's internal logic perfectly. The source refers to this moment as the end of the Sunshine era.
Assumption.
Yeah, which translates roughly to the era of heaven's natural order, where the universe naturally drives the growth of the organism. December 2012 marked the exact moment the universe stepped back, expecting the human tree to transition smoothly into Phase 3 operation, or Unyung.
But because we skipped the research and organization steps, the society we presented at that 2012 deadline was highly intelligent, but fundamentally dysfunctional and selfish.
We weren't ready to operate the terrarium, we were just fighting inside it.
So what happens when an unorganized system hits a hard cosmic deadline?
The framework suggests the universe implemented a contingency plan. It didn't wipe the slate clean, but it granted a specific 12-year grace period. From the start of 2013 through the end of 2024, humanity was basically placed in a holding pattern.
A 12-year holding pattern.
Yes. This was a window granted for us to observe our own dysfunction, recognize that our hyper-competitive systems were failing, and finally do the hard work of organizing our knowledge to correct course.
And looking back at the geopolitical and social landscape between 2013 and 2024, it does not take an expert historian to realize we did not use that grace period to become organized, ethical stewards of the planet.
Not at all. If anything, the weaponization of information and the selfish competition only accelerated.
We totally failed the grace period.
We did, and the failure of that grace period triggers the final urgent mechanism of the lecture. Because humanity proved incapable of organizing its own knowledge, the source claims a new, forced pruning phase had to be initiated by the universe.
And this brings us right to the 3-year window of 2025, 2026, and 2027. But it is vital to distinguish this modern pruning from the pruning of the world wars. When we talk about a cosmic pruning happening right now, we aren't talking about drawing physical borders with massive globe-spanning military conflicts, are we?
No, because the structural needs of the tree have changed. The Gomuknamo is already fully grown, the borders are set. The modern pruning isn't about shaping the physical exterior of the tree.
It's about excising the internal rot.
Precisely. This forced reorganization is characterized by smaller-scale, localized proxy conflicts, intense political polarization, and the systemic breakdown of massive institutions.
So it's the friction of outdated, selfish power structures basically collapsing under their own unorganized weight.
Yes, because the universe is forcibly dismantling them.
Which brings us right back to your present moment listening to this, and why this lecture is ringing a massive alarm bell about the summer of 2026. The source points to this specific year as the absolute apex of this 3-year structural correction.
And the timeline provided for 2026 is exact. It notes that 2026 is the year of the horse in the zodiac, which is an energy associated with moving faster and striking harder.
Okay.
The lecture tracks the buildup of this tension using traditional lunar calendar dates, stating that the pressure began mounting significantly on March 3rd, known as Samgin.
And it predicts that the absolute climax of this global reorganization, like the moment the pressure cooker hits maximum capacity, that will occur in a concentrated window between July 1st and July 7th of 2026.
Yeah.
July 1st to July 7th. Depending on when you're listening to this, that is merely weeks away.
Yeah.
This framework, it just completely reframes how we consume the daily news. It argues that the political polarization fracturing your country, the social tension you feel escalating your community, that pervasive, exhausting feeling that the systems governing the world are just breaking down.
None of it is an accident.
None of it. It's a forced structural correction. The universe is actively stepping in to violently organize the messy, hyper-intelligent, but ethically hollow society we built.
And viewing current events through the lens of this lecture, it really forces a paradigm shift. The political friction isn't just a byproduct of bad policy or, economic fluctuation. It is the friction of an overgrown, chaotic tree being aggressively bent and snapped into a new shape.
The institutions aren't failing because of simple mismanagement.
No, they are being systematically dismantled because they are fundamentally incompatible with the final operation phase.
It totally reframes the anxiety of the modern world. Instead of feeling like we're passengers on a sinking ship, this source argues we're on a ship that is being aggressively retrofitted and rebuilt while it's still navigating a storm at sea.
It implies that the chaos we're living through actually has a distinct teleological purpose. It has a direction.
Yeah. And while the grand cosmic scale of this lecture is sweeping, the underlying critique it makes about how humanity handles information is devastatingly practical, even if you view the whole framework purely as a metaphor.
I completely agree.
Like, let's strip away the terrarium concept and the cosmic pruning for a second and just look at the 3-step mandate. Absorb, research, organize. That is a direct diagnosis of our modern digital existence.
It really is. We exist in an era of unprecedented, paralyzing information overload. We have access to the entirety of human knowledge right in our pockets. But merely absorbing facts isn't enough.
Right.
If you are constantly doom scrolling or just passively memorizing data points without ever taking the time to actively research the broader context, you are stuck in step one.
Wow, yeah.
And if you aren't synthesizing that information to build a coherent, organized worldview, you aren't actually growing. You're just adding to the noise and the chaos of the system.
That is a phenomenal takeaway because it shifts the burden of responsibility back onto us as individuals. We can no longer afford to be passive consumers of endless data streams. We have to become active architects of our own understanding. The requirement to research and organize. It isn't just a mystical mandate for the survival of an ancient cosmic tree. It's a daily, practical necessity for maintaining a functional mind and a healthy society.
The framework ultimately suggests that intelligence without the discipline of organization is just a catalyst for conflict. The path forward requires the hard, deliberate work of ordering what we know into how we should live.
Which brings us right back to the pressure cooker we are supposedly sitting in today. The source claims that the absolute peak of global reorganization, the most intense moment of this cosmic pruning, hits in the first week of July 2026.
Right around the corner.
Right around the corner. So as you go about your day, as you look around at the political headlines, the social friction, and the institutions straining under the weight of the modern world, ask yourself a question. Are we simply watching human systems collapse under the burden of their own unorganized chaos? Or are we bearing witness to a messy, painful, but entirely necessary pruning, clearing away the dead, selfish branches to finally make room for a new phase of human operation? It is certainly a perspective to keep in mind as the pressure builds heading into the summer.